After having presented two sessions on the definitions of economics, this session presents to you the approaches to the study of economics, and this one will be on microeconomic approach, and another session will be presented to you on macroeconomic study. And I'm sure that you have liked my earlier presentation. You have shared it with your friends and subscribed to the channel. Also, please do not forget to watch the video till the end, because I give a section where there are questions to ponder, where you will find that what we discuss in the class can also be put into an application situation. So my presentation continues with PowerPoint slides, which should help you to use them as notes for your reading material. So here I go with the presentation. So when we are in microeconomics, we understand the terminology first. Ragnar Frisk, the Nobel laureate in 1969, was the first economist to use the word micro and macro. Now, he did not use economics along with micro and macro. He used the words microdynamics and macrodynamics. But later on, the two words dynamics was replaced by economics, and so you had microeconomics and macroeconomics. He referred to the study of individual firms as microeconomics and the study of aggregate economy as macroeconomics. The Adam Smith's ideas of economics essentially spoke about a self-regulating system, about a system driven by invisible hand, and an unregulated system which knew how to sort out problems arising from sale of goods or allocation of resources or labor, whatever. All these were automatically sorted out, and price adjustments would continue. Using that idea, price adjustment would continue till the markets would get cleared. This was Adam Smith's idea, and now we can see how this idea was replaced by another school of thought called the utilitarianism. And in this particular idea, they understood human behavior in terms of pleasure and pain, and argued that all human beings work towards reducing pain and increasing pleasure. This led to the development of the concepts of utility and the theories of utility that we shall look into later. Now, this in the late 1800s to the present, marginalists, also called the neoclassical economists, they talk about this utility maximization, which even today we use the same term. And they translated Smith's free market ideas into mathematical models, and that is how microeconomics is studied even today. So we can see how ideas have developed over time, and this understanding of ideas developing over time will tell you that knowledge is cumulative. And what are these areas or realms of study in microeconomics? First and foremost, microeconomics studies individual units. Now, when we say individual units or small units, there are really no small units. We can study individual units. And you can see that I have written something in red. The analogies that I'm going to give you is written in red as cars, trees, and planets, for a very simple reason. When we ask students what is microeconomics, often they state that microeconomics is a study of trees, or microeconomics is a study of cars, and so on. So to avoid that, I want to highlight to you this analogy, but at the same time, it is only an analogy. It has nothing to do with economics. So when we talk about a car, we study the smaller parts of the car or the components of the car. Here we are studying the brakes of the car, the gearbox of the car, the engine of the car, or the seat belt of a car, or whatever. Now, when we study these components in detail, then we are studying using a micro approach. Similar is example of trees. there could be forest, and in this forest there are several kinds of trees. So when the naturalist tries to study the nature of the trees, the height of the trees, the age of the trees, and so on in a forest, the naturalist is only studying particular trees, not the entire forest. And also we can understand the planetary system. So we are not studying the entire planetary system, we are just studying the movement of a particular planet, the characteristics of that planet, and so on. So we are now studying something in such detail which allows it to be called as microanalysis, or we call it as individual analysis. We in microeconomics, we also study the implications of incentives on decision making. How do individuals and firms respond to incentives? That is something we shall see a little later. Now, decisions of individuals and firms are associated with allocation of resources. So why do individuals take decisions, and what kind of economic decisions do they take? They want to know how to make the best use of the limited money that they have with them, or firms would like to know how to make the best use of the resources that they have with them, and they also need to know how to price the products that they have produced, or what should be the price for the factors of production that they employ in the production process. So we also need to know that why is it that prices are not the same for all kinds of consumers. For example, the electricity that is given to a household is given at a different price, and the electricity that is given to the business houses are different, or why there are several examples of this kind where their prices are not the same. So what makes this? Don't we need to know why the prices are different? So these kind of studies becomes a part of microeconomics. We also need to find out how to provide more benefits to producers and consumers, or to reduce the benefits to consumers and producers. Now this is done all the time by the government when it makes changes in its tax policies or expenditure policies, and then individuals, producers, or individual consumers are deeply affected by the decisions that government takes. So how is an economic decision by the government influencing economic entities? Now all economic entities will not be affected the same way. So that is where we need to study the microeconomic method of study. And then we also need to study, is it that always individuals compete with each other, or do they also cooperate with each other? Do firms compete with each other, or do firms also cooperate with each other? Do laborers compete with each other, or do they also cooperate? So these stories of cooperation and competition is also part of microeconomics, and this we shall see how we can understand these ideas a little later. Now, what really happens? So we study in microeconomics the responses and choices that people make. What is likely to happen when individuals make choices due to the incentives and prices? Now, when a sale is announced with prices slashed, how do consumers behave? How do producers behave to that? How do traders behave to that? So the behavior of these three economic entities is not the same. So how do they respond to these kind of choices that, how do they respond to these kind of changes, and what kind of choices do they make? Would a consumer wait till the time the sale is on, or would the consumer buy it even before the sale, because the necessity of getting that was very important for the consumer? And we also see what happens when what happens to the demand and supply of resources. So when we study these kind of choices that people make, it will also affect the way the resources are being demanded. So if it is known that there is going to be a sale in a month or two, then producers of that particular good start producing more and wanting to sell more in the economy. So these kind of responses can be studied when we use the microeconomic approach. It is also how do individuals make rational choices. Remember, we talk about individuals as an economic man. When you say economic man, we talk about this person to be a rational person. He can weigh what is good and bad for his economic decision that he wants, and he also knows, or she also knows, what is the constraint that the consumer has to confront within the given constraint. How do, even though there is a sale, it is not possible that everybody participates in the sale, and everybody will not participate in the sale of the same kind of goods. So there are different kinds of goods, different kinds of producers, different kinds of consumers. So these kind of studies, when we want to do in detail, we will use the microeconomic approach. And we also study the price mechanism. How do prices get settled? How do we know what is the price at which something needs to be sold? So how does that happen, and how do we attain equilibrium? Equilibrium is a state of rest. So once a price is settled, how the consumers and producers agree to that price, and at that price, how markets will get cleared, or there will be no unsold goods in the market. I have just put this whole idea of microeconomics in a flowchart for you. It makes it easier and to remember rather. And I have microeconomics, the theory of product pricing. And the theory of product pricing, as I just told you, that this product pricing, or the price of a product, is determined by two elements here: the theory of the consumer and the theory of the producer. So the producer and the consumer together, they interact, and that is how the price is settled. The consumer side, we study the theory of demand, and the producer side, we study the theory of supply. Of course, there is a second part which is called the theory of product pricing, and we know that in production there are four factors that are employed: land, labor, capital, and organization. So how do these four factors get their factorial rewards? That is what we understand here: the wages, the rent, the interest, and the profit. What factors determine these rewards for the factors of production? And the last part of study, major category of study in microeconomics, is that of welfare economics, to understand how can the welfare of people be improved. Remember Marshall's definition: the purpose of economics is to improve the welfare of people. So how can this welfare implications of many economic decisions be studied? So what is the nature of microeconomics? Microeconomics is considered basic. It provides us with the principles to study economics. Now, what is the strength of microeconomics? Microeconomics is considered simple, and simplicity of the structure in which it is working, and it is filled with concepts. A lot of new words you will be learning through in microeconomics, and all these concepts are quite recognizable in a real world. That is why we can give several examples to teach microeconomics from the real world. And because of the way the microeconomics has developed over time, microeconomics allows the use of mathematics very well. So if you are interested in economics, you must continue to study mathematics, because there are a lot of mathematic modeling that happens in the study of economics, more so in the study of microeconomics. And here we study the methods of microeconomic analysis. There are two important methods that are used in microeconomic analysis. One is called the partial equilibrium analysis, and the other is called the general equilibrium analysis. Now, we are not going into details of these two methods here. I'm just stating these two, and maybe sometime later we can get an idea of what these two terms here. Partial equilibrium, we are taking the consumer and studying the consumer. And the analysis of this consumer behavior alone, we can use it as partial equilibrium analysis. But at the same time, in the general equilibrium analysis, what we do is we consider all the markets and all the decision-making units in those markets, and see them in simultaneous motion. That means when these economic entities of the market, the supply side or the demand side, are working as individual units, but then they come to a position of equilibrium in that industry, in which case we say we are studying the general equilibrium approach. So general equilibrium is, in macroeconomics, we use as an integrated here. Here we are just seeing how a set of markets or a set of economic entities can come to a condition of equilibrium. Here, it's also important to know, being the basic subject or the principles of economics, what are the other subjects that uses microeconomics? Let me tell you, there are a series of subjects that use microeconomics, and all of them are very fascinating areas to study. Starting from public economics, which is the government's expenditure, taxation, and borrowing schemes. How does it affect economic behavior of consumers, producers, and factor owners? Or it could be studying about health. How do we demand health? What is the supply of health, and how do we fix the prices of health? And a lot of interesting things that come out in health economics, as much as in welfare, environmental economics, and resource economics. How do we understand the implication of destruction of environment? Who destroys the environment, the producers or the consumers, and so on? We can study that relationship in environmental economics. We can study urban economics, the economics of migration, for example, the economics of transport, the economics of housing. There are so many subjects that we can study in land use patterns in urban economies. Or we can study economics. Why would people spend their resources in getting themselves educated? What is the outcome of education? So how do we understand that? Maybe financial economics, and see how individual stocks in the markets are working, or how do we understand banks and the individual consumers and the rates of interest, how it affects individual borrowing or saving. And then the industrial economics, where we study firms and try to examine how do firms find equilibrium for themselves, and how do they integrate themselves with the firms producing similar goods, and what are the outcomes when they cooperate together, what are the outcomes when they compete with each other. That's another fascinating subject to study. We also have labor economics. How do labor respond when the labor wages are altered, or how do we understand the gender aspect of labor? Gender economics itself is another subject that you can look into. Information economics and economic asymmetry in economic information, and that is another branch of study. Then insurance and many more. So it is just that you understand the methods of studying microeconomics, and finally, when you study any of these disciplines that come in, subjects that come in later for you, you will find that you can study them quite well. So you need to get grounded in good microeconomics and good mathematics here, and then move on from here to studying the subfields that you may want to study. And do these microeconomic behavior have policy implications? Sure, it does, because whenever we are talking about implications and we are talking about the government behavior, any change in the government's economic activities will influence consumers, will influence producers, will influence the factor owners and the entrepreneurs. So if we want to study how the economic decisions are taken or policy decisions are taken, it is important for even the government to study microeconomic behavior. And when we study microeconomic behavior, we can understand that if there are small changes brought about in these kind of economic variables, how they would affect the response from the consumers or producers side. It can also understand trade-off between countries. International economics also uses a lot of microeconomics to see how countries trade with each other. How do they fix the tariffs for the goods that are traveling between countries? How is foreign exchange determined? All of these use the principles of microeconomics. And we can also see how an economy can become efficient, a firm can become efficient. How can a firm decide whether they should have an employment of an additional person, or is it necessary for them to decide to buy an additional computer? So these kind of decisions are many, and all of them are based on microeconomic analysis. So I come to the last section, which is points to ponder. And here I'm taking a totally unrelated subject to what I was talking this far. I'm talking about an economic ecosystem like the lake. And this lake is polluted. Assume that the lake is polluted. Would you be able to use this microeconomic approach and understand why this lake got polluted? Will it be possible to study that? And can you apply, can you observe the economic activities that are taking around you, so that you learn to develop a very important skill that economists have, which is called the observation skill. So I hope that you have liked this lecture. You please pass on your comments and suggestions for further sessions that I do, and share and like your session. Thank you very much.